Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at another offering from the Italian company Viqueria. This one is the Heritage V1, and as we'll talk about through the video, this is called the V1 for a reason. They're actually planning on expanding the Heritage lineup and will actually have some other ones that are in the works. You may recall, if you're familiar with the channel, we recently looked at one of their other models, the Tuono. This one is, as you'll see, a significant departure from that. This is certainly, as you can tell, geared more towards the dress styling, though I would say that this is a dress casual, particularly given the size, and we'll look at all of that as we go through the video. So this is one that really starts off actually as a movement. They really built the watch around the movement, and that'll be an interesting story, and we'll talk about that as we go through the video. So before we delve too far into that one, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the packaging. So this, you can see, it is nice, I assume a faux leather for that. You open that up, you have a pillow inside. I will tell you the final version, so this is a prototype that we're looking at here, though these are available and in fact almost actually sold out. The final version will have their logo embossed into the top. And we'll talk about a couple other changes to the watch itself as we go through. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into these specs. First, we just looked at, you get the box, you actually get a strap of your choice with this one, and we'll look at both of the versions here. I have them with me. This does come standard with a 2-year warranty, and as far as the actual specs of the watch, this is coming in with a 41mm case, which that's why I say it's kind of teetering on the line. It's definitely larger than most traditional dress watches, but at the same time, I think with the overall styling, it can still do double duty well. Going down to the bezel, you can see the bezel is somewhat set back. That, on my calipers, measures in at 38.9. And I should note, when I mention the case size, that is larger than the specs, but that is my caliper reading for that. Looking at the lugs, this does come with a standard 20 millimeter lugs for this one. And the lug to lug is coming in at 47.15 millimeters. So certainly will do well on most wrist sizes, smaller or larger. I think this one will fit you pretty well. The thickness, while we have that flipped around, this is coming in on my calipers, including that crystal, at 12.2. And as you can see, that crystal does definitely have a very pronounced dome. So while we're talking about the crystal, one thing that I will note here, this, as you might come to expect on many, this unfortunately does not have a sapphire crystal with it. This is a mineral crystal here. However, it does have an inner AR coating, and as we get into the price, you'll find out that this one is an extremely inexpensive watch overall. They are really concentrating on taking the price down. Personally, I would have liked to have seen a couple bucks more and upgrade that to a sapphire crystal, but ultimately, I think it's still overall a compelling package, and we'll talk about that. For the movement on this one, as I mentioned, and pardon the sticker here, with this being the prototype, I didn't want to remove it on that. But with the movement here, this one, and I apologize if my pronunciation is butchered here, but this is actually a Russian movement. This is the Poljot, and this is the 2609 is the model for this. And you can see that right there. This one is somewhat unique. So this, as I mentioned, it's a Russian Russian movement, which is less common certainly in micro brands. This one is actually a hand wind only. You notice there's no rotor there. Since I personally did not have a lot of advanced familiarity with this watch, I know it's well regarded from prior research, but no direct experience. So I wanted to share full specs. So this one does not have hacking. It is going to come with around a 42-hour power reserve. It is a somewhat low beat movement at 21,600 beats per hour. And the standard regulation is going to be coming in at -20 or +10, which in and of itself is relatively respectable. However, I will note that Viqueria does actually service, they not only service these movements, but additionally, they did regulate them. In my usage, I was getting right around -3 to -4 seconds per day. So I would say plenty adequate. I prefer it to run a little fast as opposed to slow, but that's still within COSC specs there, so can't complain about that too much. The water resistance on this one is going to be coming in at 5 atmospheres or 50 meters. So respectable, but definitely, again, as we've talked about before, not one I'd recommend jumping into a pool. The style's not really conducive of that anyways, so I think plenty fine for what it is. On the strap here for weight, this is coming in on my scale at 61.3 grams. That's including the strap. So this one, I think, is fair to say it's in the featherweight category. Very, very light watch. This puts it on par with many of the other ones that we've looked at on the light side. Very few that I have that are lighter, and especially with being a 316L stainless steel case, not titanium, that is very impressive total packaging. So now that we have that all out of the way, let's go ahead and look at some of the direct characteristics of this watch. So first, we'll start with the dial. I'll pop up on the screen. There's, of course, this blue one that's available, and then there are two other colors that are available. There's a black and a white also available. Those you can see, they do differ as far as the overall layout and setting. In particular, you'll notice on the white, it does have blued hardware. Looking at the actual dial, you can see around the perimeter, this does have a railroad track going around the exterior. And then in the middle there, it is what I would call like a matte or a satin for overall finishing for it. It is more of a matte texture, though it does have a little bit of the satin sheen. So it's right in between and blurring that line. On the dial itself, you can see that it does have exclusively printed text. You can see the Viqueria Italian watch company, and then down towards the 6 o'clock, you have hand winding. As you can see, the Viqueria and the hand winding are both stylized with a cursive, almost like a calligraphy type of font choice there, whereas you have more of a traditional font for the Italian watch company. Overall, I think it has a pretty clean appearance, and I think it's pretty well integrated and blended. I know there are many people who have commented about not preferring a mix of Italian and English or sticking with the origins. Personally, doesn't bother me at all. I think that's perfectly fine. The perimeter, if we can look there, you can see the perimeter does have the outer markings for this. So this actually has minute track, but it also has half-minute track in there, which I like that. I think that makes it nice and easy to set, so you don't have to necessarily wait for the 12 o'clock, and especially with not having a hacking movement, I think that does help to get it dialed in without having to wait the full minute to try to catch up before you start with the winding. Looking at the handset, you can see you have a nice delicate for the second hand, and then I would call the minute and hour hand a leaf style for that, somewhat of a traditional leaf shape there. This is, of course, going to be, as you can see there, a full polish. And then for the markers, it does have numerals at, of course, the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock. And then you have what I would call like spearheads around for the remaining positions. As you might notice there, this does have loom on all of the markers with the exception of the 12 and the 6. However, it does not have loom on the hands. So I'll go ahead and pop up a shot of that. As you can see, the loom is what I would describe as being decorative. One, it's pretty lightly applied. Two, it doesn't charge extremely well or hold its charge extremely well. But overall, as far as for the styling, I do think it adds a little bit of visual appeal. And additionally, I think it adds some contrast when you're looking at this darker dial. So certainly not one that I would complain about, but it is worth noting that for all intents and purposes, I don't consider this to be a loom watch as far as you're not going to have at-night legibility, but it is an interesting little touch. For the bezel, this, as we saw, does have a fixed bezel, and it is an angular step down there. This bezel is going to be principally radial brushing, as you can see there, and it is pretty well finished overall. And then out on the outside lip, there's just a tiny little lip there that does have polish around that perimeter, so just adding a little bit of interest, and it also blends down to the case. So while we're talking about the case, this case here, as you can see, it does have an extensive mix of polish and brushing. Let's move that around there, get some of the different angles. So this one has, as you can see, just a nice strip, as has become fairly common, and you do have an upper and a lower polish. The upper polish is a little more broad than many that we've looked at. Overall, for machining, as we'll see here, and we'll talk about that further, it's not perfect, but at the price point, I do think that it is reasonably well done. The same thing is true if you notice anything as far as marks, scratches, scuffs, etc. Again, this is a prototype that was sent into to the channel, so do expect that would be cleaned up on the final version. The contour of the case, you can see it does certainly have downturned lugs. It does hug relatively well to the wrist. The lugs do protrude slightly beyond the case back, so as far as for larger wrist, I wouldn't say that I would anticipate this digging in. It's not pronounced at all, but overall, I found it on my 6.5-inch wrist to be rather comfortable. And while we're doing that, let's go ahead and take off the one I'm wearing today. This is a Zelos Mako, and this is actually a Ulit Perlon here. I'll have a link in the description, Amazon affiliate link that does help out the channel. So let's go ahead and take a look at this and just see what this looks like on the wrist while we go through some of these specs. So the case, as we'll see here, and as we saw in the outdoor footage, this does, I think, hug relatively well onto the wrist. You can see not digging in by any means, but if you have a much larger wrist, you might notice the lugs a little more. I don't expect it would be a hot spot or any kind of issue there though. Looking at the case in between the lugs, you can see that this does have a full polish in between the lugs there. So it does differ a little bit from the exterior of the case. Personally, I generally prefer to have brushing in between the lugs, but I know this is a very popular option and many watches do go that route. Flipping over to the crown, this one is coming in at a 5.8 millimeter crown, 5.88 to be more precise there. This one is just a push-pull crown, as you would expect for the styling, and with the fact that it is a hand-wind movement. The final version will have a signed crown. So as you can see, this is just a polished and just a flat slab there. This will be signed on the final version, so do expect that. One thing that I will say, the overall winding for this, as you can see and maybe hear there, is relatively smooth. I have noticed every now and then I get a little bit of what I would call loading of that, where it hits almost like a false stop, but it's not actually fully wound for that. I have not run into any issues. Like I said, the regulation has been solid and it has not presented anything. Not being familiar with this movement, I don't know if that's a characteristic of the movement, if that's something specific to just this one sample, but it is worth noting as just a minor thing there. For the size and the overall grip and texture, I found this relatively easy to wind, which is something you definitely want if you're dealing with a hand wind movement. So that is has been satisfactory there, and I've been pleased with that. Flipping over to the case back, we already looked at some of this. As you can see, this is going to be principally a mirror finish there. This unfortunately does have a lot of fingerprints, so pardon those. But as far as the movement, it does have obviously an exhibition case back. Around the perimeter, this does have a mix of Italian text, as you can see here. Actually, you know what? As I'm looking, I take that back. You have very, very minimal Italian text, and I apologize. This case back portion, I should have ripped off this sticker there. But as far as the overall finishing, fairly simple there. The actual movement itself, you can see it's not the prettiest movement in the world, but I never turn down an exhibition case back if they're going to offer it. So I think that's a nice touch, and for the price point, it certainly didn't add to the overall pricing. All right, so now shifting over to the straps here. As I mentioned, this one does come with 20 millimeter lugs. This one does taper down at the last hole. This is coming in right at 17.4 millimeters, so it does have about a 2.5 millimeter taper to that. The buckle on this, as you can see on this one, is unsigned. However, that's another item to note. The final version will be signed for the buckle as well. And then while we're on the topic of strap, these are the two that you get the choice between. So you can go with this more coarse texture, or you can go with this embossed texture that's kind of like a faux alligator for that. And that just gives you an idea as to what that would look like. While we're talking about straps, let's go ahead and bring in a couple. So wanted to actually show you some comparisons here. This is if you wanted to go for a more casual look. You can see kind of what that would look like on khaki canvas, like I have on this Zelos Nova. And then there's actually gives you an idea as far as size-wise. Look at that sparkle going on that aventurine dial. Love that. But this gives you an idea, though, of this one, I believe, is 39 millimeters. This one is coming in on my calipers of 41, though overall presence isn't a dramatic difference, but certainly this one does have more presence to that. And then on the one that I was wearing today, sticking with the blue theme, this gives you an idea. So this is a 40 millimeter and, of course, a dive style. That gives you an idea of how those compare size-wise. And then finally, for my personal strap pick, if you're familiar with the channel, you may know I don't personally use leather straps, but this is my go-to for leather substitute. This is actually a Colorway, and then here's a Zelos Skeleton Sky Raider. But this is a Colorway, and this is actually a microfiber, though it does have that suede look. So it looks, here you can see a side-by-side, looks very similar to that suede or that coarse look to that. And there's a number of colors available, though I think this one actually goes pretty well with this blue dial too. So that would personally be my choice for overall for this one as far as the aesthetic. So now with that, let's go ahead and transition over to the positives, the critiques, and the overall summary. So first, for the positives, this one, I've beat around the bush here a lot with price. This one came in at a launch price of $165 US, which is just insane to me. Its final price was around 215 US dollars. That's converted over, but that gives you a pretty close ballpark for what it is. I think at that price, you're looking at a price that's cheaper than many AliExpress watches out there, and I think you certainly get a lot more bang for your buck than you would for an AliExpress watch. The movement choice. This is something, I like going against the grain, especially with one that is a well-regarded movement for reliability and overall has some history to it. So I think that was a cool choice, especially to go kind of against the grain for that one. On the wrist, I found this to be both light and comfortable, and it's consistent with the specs that we looked at throughout. It does hug well to the wrist, and it's one that I find fits into the dress or dress casual category well. The edge, you get a fantastic distortive effect. I absolutely love that. Look at that railroad track playing around there. Look at the numeral change. Really cool. Very happy with that. I think it was a great choice for the crystal, though as we mentioned, I would prefer that this be sapphire as opposed to mineral. And then finally, the design itself, I think, is attractive. I think it is relatively understated, but I think it's well done, and I think it still has some visual appeal without looking like a completely off-the-shelf type of watch. So for the critiques, and there are a few of them. As I mentioned, this is the prototype. I have talked to the owner. This one does have some minor debris. There's some little QC things for it. You can see maybe on the 6 o'clock, there's some marks there. You can see on the handset, there's some marks there. So overall, this one I do know was handled and it was not put through the full QC. So that will be cleaned up. I've been assured of that on the final production units. This one was just rushed out, which oftentimes does happen. So I did want to mention those. As we talked about, the lume is just going to be decorative, so if you're looking for a lume watch, this one's not going to provide nighttime visibility for you. The machining of this, as we mentioned here, it's not the crispest lines in the world, or most crisp lines in the world in some places, but overall, I don't think it's bad at all for the price, so that's just a very, very minor critique there. Same thing, mineral versus sapphire, we've already beat that one to death here. And then finally, the crown loading that I mentioned. I'm not sure if that's something, like I said, just to expect with this movement. I don't love it when it does do that, but it's not bad. You just have to trust that it's not actually at the stop, so kind of gauge where you're at for that and don't push too hard. So overall, where does that leave us? I think the final verdict is pretty much what you would expect at this price point. To me, it's really a you can't go wrong kind of proposition. Overall, if you like the look of this one, I think for around the $200 mark, I think it does pack a compelling value proposition, so I definitely think it's worth your consideration. I hope this has been helpful for you. As I mentioned, I do have Amazon affiliate links in the description. If you want to click those, that does help the channel. Additionally, if you found this video helpful and you would like to smash that like button, that does help me out. And most importantly, if you would like to see more content, please do hit that subscribe button. That helps tremendously for growth. And then finally, if you'd like to see more content, you can find me on Instagram. Thanks for watching.